Well, first off, I want to say, guys, I'm so grateful to be here. This is what truly gets me going every single morning. Being able to talk about a subject matter that's so important to me, and I think that needs to be discussed more. In a society where there's constant judgment and comparison, our mental health has really taken a nosedive collectively as a society. And it used to be, where we would be keeping up with the Jones. Now it's keeping up with the Kardashians. There is this comparison culture that is rampant in society. And the dangers of it are, again, where you used to just maybe compare yourself to those in your hometown or your neighborhood or school. Now we have the ability to compare ourselves to the entire world. We go on social media. We click on a photo of somebody. We start to go through their life that we see, which is, of course, on the internet, most people put their best foot forward. But what we often find is that as we scroll through, we click and we say, oh man, they seem to have such a great life. And then what happens? The algorithm puts another person in front of you that has a similar life. And so you click on that, and then you click on somebody else. And before you know it, an hour later, you realize your mental health has taken a turn for the worse, and you start to feel insufficient and not good enough because you've now compared yourself to 100 people. And that is a vicious cycle that can continue day after day after day if we're not mindful. And so this is something that I'm not immune to. It happens to me every single day. But I've found that as I've been able to become more self-aware, I'm able to start to combat it. And that's really why I'm here today. I want to share my story with you all about how I've started to go on this self-love journey. By no means have I mastered it. I have my days where things are great, and then I have my dark days. But there are some things that I've found have worked really well for me. So my goal is to share with you all what has helped me out, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A discussion. Please, I hope you guys understand that this is no judgment on my end. I love being able to open up, and sometimes the Q&A is the most impactful portion because that's when people really get to tell you what's on their mind. So I want to make this an open place where we can all have a discussion, and I will share my story and get as vulnerable as I can with you all. First, though, I do want to ask for a bit of vulnerability out of us, and so I have two questions to ask you guys. Who here has experienced judgment or has felt judged, and even in the last month? I want to start off by making it easy, but it's the truth, right? And I'm raising my hand as well. Let me ask one a little bit deeper. How many of you all have felt not good enough in the last couple months? Right, guys, you can see how many hands come up, and I'm right there alongside. In fact, I just was feeling that way yesterday. And why is that? Well, for me, I found that I didn't truly know who I was as I went through life. I was trying to appease others. I'm a big people pleaser. And I'll dive into what that manifested, what that turned into. But at a young age, I can remember as early as 7th grade, that was when I started to have these feelings of insufficiency. And I thought if I just suppressed those feelings, eventually time would pass and I would just overcome them. But that wasn't the case. All that happened is when I didn't feel good enough as a child, that feeling just carried with me through my adult life, and it just manifested in different ways. And so it's important that we address our issues, not suppress them, because as we suppress them, what happens is there's a bubble up effect. I like to say it's similar to picking up a rock that would be symbolized trauma. If we pick up a rock and we take a look at it and we say, I don't want to deal with this, I just want to run from this issue right now. We take this rock, we put it in our pocket, and we go about our day. We don't see that rock is no longer in front of our field of view, and we just move on with our life. Well, what happens is the more times we pick up trauma and we keep putting that rock in the pocket, it's now weighing down on us more and more. We're carrying those rocks with us, and eventually two things can happen. You can run out of space in that pocket, and all the rocks start to spill out. I think of that as like an emotional breakdown. Or you can, the lining of the pocket effectively rips and is no longer functional. That analogy to me is exactly what it's like being a human, where if we just continue to take trauma, instead of addressing it, we just stash it away for later, it just piles up on top of each other over time, and eventually there's either a spillover effect or it effectively destroys us, just like the coat pocket, where we can no longer function. And so today I want to share with you all some of my past experiences, and really just kind of guide you through why I am the way I am. But that was the first question that I had to ask myself. Who am I? I wasn't sure who I was. A lot of times when we say, who are we, we answer with what we do, our profession. We say, maybe we're a mother or father, or a child to somebody. But what I found was there's a danger in labels, and a lot of the labels that we put on ourselves, they're temporary. And so what happens is when those labels go away, then what do we become? And this is what I experienced when I was in the NFL. I played football my entire life from 7th grade all the way up into the NFL. And if anyone asked me who I was an NFL athlete, or I was a football player. But then when that was no longer, when I got cut from Seattle, I didn't know who I was. I had this big identity crisis. I thought, well, what am I now? No one, if I don't have that worth, then where's the validation? How am I going to find it elsewhere? And that's the danger. A lot of times when we lose a label, we begin to question, what are we? And so for me, I found out, and I'll talk more about it later, but I found a phrase that really helped me be able to conceptualize and make sense of what exactly I am, and I've carried that with me now, and it's brought me a sense of peace. So as far as who I am, there's a lot up on this slide here, okay? So I'm going to go through each of this. I know you're going to see on the far right there, that was a DM from back in 7th grade, but I want to take you guys back to where my mental health struggles began. It was 7th grade, and that is a 7th grade photo of me on the left. I show this because for a multitude of reasons. That kid on the far left, that was the kid that I saw in the mirror my entire life, really up until maybe the last 6 months. And this is why it's so important for people not to judge a book by its cover, because a lot of people, I've seen this online, people judge me based off of the way that I look, and they make these assumptions. Oh, he's this big guy, he had everything given to him, he's always been this way, when it couldn't be farther from the truth. A lot of times we don't realize what people are dealing with internally, where they came from, their backstory. I know I'm holding up a first place ribbon there. That's probably one of the only few times I won something at that age. I just wasn't a good athlete. In fact, that was me freshman year of high school in that middle picture. And I was a 4th string quarterback. So 4th string means there's 3 guys ahead of me. All 3 of them would have to get injured for me to play. So that was my expertise, or how good I was at football. To compound on that, when I was a junior, I was on junior varsity. My brother, who was a freshman at the time, was starting varsity. So naturally, I started to compare myself, and my friends started to make fun of me. And they told me, you should quit football. Your brother's 2 years younger. He's starting on varsity while you're on JV as a junior. You're a joke. You're not athletic. Give it up. And that really wore down on me, because back then at that age, our sense of value is often tied up into relationships in sports. Or maybe if you played a musical instrument, maybe it was tied up in band. It could have been theater, whatever it was. But back then at that age, as children, our sense of worth really comes from relationships mainly. And maybe for me as well, it was sports. It was how good of an athlete am I? And that was how I was measuring my sense of worth. Well, I felt worthless in the sports realm, because I was being compared to by my brother, who was 2 years younger, and I was supposed to be the superstar athlete. I was supposed to be the best one of the family because I was older. So I didn't have any self-worth in that realm. Now, as you see on this far right here, this was a direct message, and here's the thing, with social media, whatever you post now, it never goes away. So that's a direct message. I can show you, even though that picture is more updated, you can see it says 13Y. That's because that was from 13 years ago. So Facebook, I went back and I captured this. This was how I used to talk to women. This was me trying to spit game, if you want to call it that, or flirt. I was trying to flirt with this girl that I really liked. And yeah, I just put it this way, I wasn't a wordsmith, okay? But why I showed that is because when it came to relationships, I was friend zoned by all the girls that I wanted to date. They called me Big Brother. That was my nickname. So when I was in 7th grade, I was all their friend, their best friends, and I loved it. I was like, this is great. But then hormones kicked in. And all of a sudden, you don't want to really be friends. You're like, well, maybe we can go out and get ice cream or go on a date. But none of them wanted to date me. They all just saw me as a friend, and they called me Big Brother. And it really bothered me, because I felt that I wasn't good enough. Why doesn't anybody want to date me? Again, I was a little awkward with the way that I spoke to women, but I meant well, but ultimately I just didn't feel good enough in that realm. And so that's where it all began for me. I started to go down a dark and destructive path. I had no self-worth, and I became a people pleaser. I set out on a mission to try to impress people and try to build something that I finally felt like I could present in front of people and say, am I now good enough for you? Is this finally impressive enough for you? So I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to try to impress people and I'm not good enough in sports and with women, maybe I should start by addressing one first. So I walked on the Mizzou football team. I'll never forget, I had no scholarship offers coming out of high school. I ended up starting my senior year finally. I had a coach that believed in me when I didn't. And he pulled me aside and said, listen, the other coaches want to place another guy as the starting defensive end, but I believe in you. I see how hard you work. You just don't believe in yourself. But if you go out there today and you play as well as I know you can get this starting position. And I see what you don't see in yourself. But now it's time for you to start. That man single-handedly changed my life with one conversation. The power of one conversation can completely change a life. I didn't believe in myself that day, but I went out there and the people pleaser in me played for him. I didn't want to embarrass him. I didn't want the coaches to go, why would you, see, we told you the other guy was going to be better. So I played my absolute heart out, and I was fortunate enough to be able to win that starting job. Well, when my career ended in high school, I was going to walk away from football. I was totally fine with it. But I'll never forget, after the game, all my friends were crying because we lost the game, and I didn't feel anything. I was just like, football's football, whatever, next chapter of my life. But I was walking off the field, and my dad walked up to me, and he was crying. And it was one of the first times I ever saw my dad crying ever. And he looked at me, and he said, I'm so proud of you. And, it still gets me because I knew in that moment that I wasn't going to let go of football at that point. Because the people pleaser in me, that's all I needed to hear, was someone was proud of me. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to go take this as far as I can because I want my family to be proud of me. I want people to look up to me, and I want them to finally give me this external validation. Again, at the time, I didn't know what that I was seeking, but I was seeking approval. And in that split second, in that moment, I finally had that validation. It's not that my parents invalidated me, but that was just a really special moment, and I thought, I got to keep doing this for them. And so I said I was going to walk on. And the reason why I walked on at Mizzou, after not getting a scholarship offer anywhere, was because it was, maybe it was low risk. If I didn't make the team, no one expected me to because I didn't have a scholarship offer. So I didn't want to go to a Division II or D1 AA school because if I didn't make it, everyone would be like, see, you're terrible. You couldn't make a Division II school. And again, Division II players are super, super talented. But in my head, I said, well, if I go to the highest level and I don't make it, no one expected me to anyway, so there's really no risk. But I ended up making it on the team. I ended up getting a scholarship and started a few games, and then naturally I felt all that validation. I was a Mizzou football player for 5 years of my life. And every room that I walked in, when I went to family functions, everyone wanted to ask me about the opponents we were playing, and I felt I finally felt like I had so much value. So naturally, I started to get some looks, in the NFL, and I thought, well, I got to go. I got to keep taking it higher and higher. I want more validation because this will finally prove to people that I've built something up that has worth. And meanwhile, again, too, like all of it, everything that I built up, the physical image, I was like, I need to pack on all this muscle because the more imposing of a figure I am, the more respect, I'll receive. And at a young age, that was what I saw. It was, it was sad, but it was the truth. I got bullied a lot. And then when I started putting size on, people started treating me differently. And so I thought, well, see, look how everyone's treating you. Now I got to put all this muscle on because then they'll respect me even more. And so I was misunderstanding that, but that's what I took. And so I went to the NFL, and I had a cup of coffee with the Seahawks. I'll say that. I wasn't there. I was in and out like a bank robbery, so it was a very short-lived experience. But when I was playing, I'll never forget, I went back to my high school, and my ego, my fragile ego. I walked through the schools with all of my Seahawks gear on while I was still on the team. I came back from break, and I walked in there. And you know what? I tried to make it seem like I wanted to come back and go talk to the kids and really just give back to my community. But the reality was I walked in there for myself. I walked in there with my ego just pushing out there for everyone to see, saying, yeah, you guys remember when you didn't believe in me? Like, look who's wearing the Seahawks gear. right? And I didn't present that outwardly, but that's how frail my ego was. I felt like I had to show people, like, look what you guys, counted out. And so I went back, and then I went back and I for training camp, and I played through the preseason, and I got cut. And I'll never forget, the day before, I probably had 50 to 60 people that were texting me. The day that I got cut, the next day, I think I had like 4 or 5, because I was no longer an NFL athlete. A day later, less than 24 hours, and it was like, you're no longer in the NFL, and we no longer have interest in you. Now, here's the fact of the matter. Most of those people I was texting, they weren't close friends, good people. They were just trying to be around me because I was, the flashy item. But again, I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't have the emotional wherewithal to really understand that. So I saw that as, oh my gosh, like, I'm not good enough again. So no one sees value in me. That's why everyone stopped responding to me. So with that, I said, okay, well, gotta find another way to be seen as impressive in the eyes of people. So I went into medical device sales. Why did I go into medical device sales? Well, because 2 things. One, I knew it was going to pay good money, so I thought, okay, if I'm rich, everyone's going to be like, wow, he makes a lot of money, he's super successful. The other part of it, I thought, okay, well, if I go into the ORs, I'll be working alongside surgeons. So people are going to be like, wow, you work in the OR, that's so impressive. Guys, I had such low self-esteem that my ego, I spelled orthopedic with the AE spelling. Instead of the E, it's like the British version of it. I spelled it on my LinkedIn profile because I thought it looked a little bit cooler, a little bit more impressive. Like, oh, he spelled it with the AE version. That's impressive. That's how much I was trying to impress people, and I was so hyper-focused on what are these little things I can do to just make myself appear a little bit better. But again, when you have your values rooted in the wrong things, i.e. external validation, after a while, people aren't as impressed. And they were impressed at first. Oh, wow, he works for this big company. He's in there with the OR. They're doing orthopedic surgeries. He's selling the implants. That's really cool. And so again, I was getting all of this validation. But then, 5 years later, it wore out. Okay, yeah, he's in medical sales. He's been there for 5 years. And I started to lose it again. And so I started to have this, at my 28th birthday, I'll never forget, 2 years ago, I had what I called my quarter-life crisis. I don't know if I'll actually make it times 4 that amount. That'd be 120 or whatever. But I called it my quarter-life crisis, and I just felt that I need to do more. I was like, this can't be it. I remember thinking, I was like, I can't live and die here in Columbia, Missouri. I'm seeing my future. I'm going to take over the senior reps territory, and even though I'll make all this money, I feel like I'm destined for more. And so I thought, okay, I have to find something else to scratch that itch, to get that validation again, because it's no longer impressive. Like, everyone knows I'm a medical sales rep. Well, timing is everything, and just around that time, I got a DM from a recruiter for reality television. They slid in my DMs, and they said, hey, Clayton, we're interested in potentially interviewing you. Would you be, would it be possible for you to come on The Bachelorette? And so The Bachelorette, for those that don't know, The Bachelorette is a show where there's one woman and she dates 30 men at once. You can imagine it's a recipe for disaster, but it's a show based on polyamory, and a bunch of monogamous people watch it, so you can understand there's a lot of discourse that's always said about the show. It gets the people going, it riles them up. Everyone's like, why would he do that? And it's because why would somebody? Well, until you get in that environment, and again, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it presents a lot of discussion. Well, I wasn't ready to go on reality television, but I thought, you know what? I'm not happy at my current job, and I'll just take this leap. I'll probably get sent home night 1, and then after I get sent home, that'll be it. And some girl will watch the show, she'll see me, and she'll reach out to me on my DMs. I was kind of like just going on the show to just cast a wider net. I was like, maybe I'll find my person, because I'm not finding them here in the college town that I live in. I was like 28 in a college town. I felt like I was a 70-year-old. Like, everyone's like, you're 28? What are you doing here? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm young. But what I didn't know, and again, I say that I went on the show to find, just to cast a wider net for a dating pool. The reality was, once again, my ego struck. And my ego was like, if you went on reality television, though, like, that'd be a differentiator. That'd kind of make you cool. So I go on the show and thinking, I have a good experience actually on the Bachelorette side of things. And then I don't get one of the roses. They hand out roses for the show, and I don't get a rose. And so I go back to my room, and the producers, they say, hey, like, come by, they see me, like, how you feeling? I was like, I feel incredible. Like, this really just like was a fun experience, and I'm just ready to go to the next chapter of my life. They said, well, you know, what do you think about being the Bachelor? I said, say that again, just so I could hear you say that twice. Really? They said, yeah, we really like who you are. You're an authentic person, and we really feel like you could be a good fit. And no guarantees, but we'd at least like for you to go through the interview process. I don't think he got out the end of that sentence by the time I said yes, because I jumped on that thing with not a moment's hesitation. And why? So why was that? Because this was finally my moment to be able to be seen no longer as the big brother. I was like, you know what? If I become the Bachelor, I'll be the quote-unquote most sought-after man in America. So now all of a sudden, I'm no longer big brother to anybody. I am, you know, the guy. Again, that was my ego. And so that's where I in that moment, I jumped on it without hesitation. Well, when you go on reality television and you don't truly know who you are and you're a people pleaser, you can just get puppeted around. And I'll just say that I basically did whatever I could to be seen as favorable in the eyes of the producers and favorable in the eyes of the fans that watched the show, the women that were on the show with me, and I was just trying to make everybody happy. That's impossible when you go on reality television. Now I'm going to put up this and say it's a trigger warning. What I want to show you guys is messages that I received over the course of 24 hours at the height of the show. It's a trigger warning because the messages are very explicit, and they came in by the thousands. I won't go into great detail about what happened on the show. That would be a talk, another 4-hour conversation. But long story short, I wasn't a well-liked Bachelor. To some people thought they understood why I did what I did, but I stirred up a lot of drama, and people were very, very angry. And so these were some of the messages that I received. But these were messages that I received by the thousands, and these were all within 24 hours. I just grabbed the worst ones. But I got many, many of them. People telling me that I'm stupid, that I should kill myself, that I'm not deserving of love, that if they see me in person, that they'll find me and put a bullet in my head. They called me a narcissist, trash, gaslighter.
Useless people.
People that are hurting. Right? So what I found out is that individuals that go attack a stranger online, they're hurting internally. And they're attacking you because they want to pull you down to their level because they don't want to feel alone. We're social creatures as humans, and so I don't think a lot of people realize they're doing that, but the reason why people pull you down to their level is because now there's someone else that's hurting as bad as they're hurting. Right? So a lot of these messages were projection of insecurities or projection of past pain that I reminded them of. And they went on a full attack on me. And this was really, really hard for me because, again, as a people pleaser, 5 messages, 10 messages I could brush off. But when I got thousands of messages, it rocked my confidence. And I started to question again, who am I? Like maybe I am what all these people say that I am. Because it must be some truth to it because there's so many people. It felt like the entire world was coming down upon me. And if I had all the self-confidence and self-love in the world, I would have been able to shake this off and just be like, yeah, these are just angry people and whatever, it's a TV show, get over it. But no, instead I took it all to heart. It really did completely tear me to shreds. It tore me down to my absolute core. And what I was left with was a destroyed version of myself. And I had 2 options at that point. I could have crawled in that corner that I was pushed within and just laid there and taken the beating, or I could have stepped back up and said, you know what, I'm going to rebuild myself from the ground up. But this time I'm going to rebuild myself in a way that I want to, the person that I actually want to be. I'm going to live a life for myself and nobody else. But how do I do that? Well, unfortunately, before I could do that, I had another accusation that I had to fight. This is the second accusation I faced in the last 2 years. Again, I won't go into the great details. I'll tell you this much. I was a cheating accusation last year. I proved it false within 12 hours because I had location services on my iPhone. That saved my butt. Some girl said I flew out to see her in New York, hooked up with her, and then flew back when I had a girlfriend at the time. My location services saved me. But again, because I was a target on reality television and people didn't like me, I have people that are out to get me, and this is something that's still ongoing. This was the first article that came out This woman claimed that she became pregnant with my twins. I won't go into great detail. The whole story is still out there for everyone to see, but I can tell you this much, it's completely false. This individual did this previously to 2 other men. She has a repeat history of doing this to individuals, but she tried to, she tried to basically destroy my image. That was the first article that came out. She came out anonymously. And what happened? Well, I was guilty until proven innocent. Everybody believed it to be true, and I saw a lot of comments online, people saying, yeah, this is exactly the guy that we saw on reality television. This is what we saw. He's a terrible person. This tracks very well with who he is. And so just when I was starting to rebuild myself back up, I got absolutely flatlined by this, and it took me right back down to the darkest of darkest moments in my life. I thought, am I ever going to be able to be good enough in the eyes of others? Am I ever going to be able to just present something that people can love? Is there ever going to be value that people are going to see in me? Why am I continually getting hit with these things? Like I'm trying so hard to just be accepted, but it feels like every time I take a step forward, I get knocked 10 steps back. And so what got me through this, though, there's some of the things that I want to share with you all today. When you don't have a sense of purpose, or when you question your, who am I, and you don't feel like you fit in, and you feel like you're being judged, you have the option to either say, okay, I'm just going to continue to let this pain overtake me, or I want to try to find a way to view myself in a more graceful manner, to give myself, to love me for who I am. And I started to, kind of look around and see and say, okay, can I do this? Can I truthfully love who I am for what I've done and just for everything that I've become? Because when I came off The Bachelor, I still didn't feel good enough. I remember, I finished the show, and I was sitting there one night in my house, and I was like, why? What is it going to take? What is it going to take, Clayton? You don't feel good enough. You made it to the highest levels of sports, that is the NFL. You then become The Bachelor, and you still don't have any self-worth. What is it going to take? I remember thinking, I know people that are back in my hometown that that's all they've known. They've grown up in their hometown, and they are happier than ever. They have their job, they have their family, and they have all of this love, and they didn't need to go play NFL. They didn't need to do any of these other things in life. They're doing a lot, and a lot more than I realized, but they place their values in the right area. But I was comparing myself in that moment. I thought, how come you have done all these things that you think are so impressive, and yet you still don't have any value? You don't have any self-worth. And that's when it hit me. I realized that I will only have that self-love and that self-worth when I choose to finally believe that I have love and worth and value. And so I thought, okay, well, that's great, Clayton, that you believe it's a choice, but now how are you going to implement that? That's way easier said than done. So the first thing that I did was I started to journal. And this is a real journal entry that I was writing actually at the time of The Bachelor when it was airing. So we filmed the show, and then 4 months later the show airs. And so this was toward the end of the show. I have chicken scratch handwriting, so I apologize. But I find this to be so interesting because for me, the power of journaling is that it serves as a way to address what you're feeling, to take that suppression of thoughts and that jumbled mess that's up in our head, and you're able to put it out on paper. Now, what I was told by a friend that actually taught me the journaling, I remember I was on The Bachelorette, and we were roommates, and he said, we were sitting there one night after we were done filming, and he said, I look over at him, and he's writing in his journal. And I remember, fragile ego, I said, are you writing in a diary? And he goes, yeah, sure, call it whatever. He called it a diary, journal. He's like, yes, I'm writing. Yes, I am journaling. Why? I said, does that help? Like, why? What are you writing about? He's like, just whatever is on my mind. He's like, I got so much going on up here. I just try to get it out on paper. I said, yeah, but for what purpose? He said, well, just so that I can kind of put it out there. He goes, and then what I find is great is he's like, I have like 10, 20 journals at this point. He's like, but I write in them, and what I love to do is I love to go back in time a few years later and look back and see the growth. He goes, I'll find that I actually am using different words than what I was when I first wrote in that. And he's like, sometimes he's like, when it comes to growth, we need to have an anchor point. And that anchor point needs to be, at an earlier point in time where we can see with our own eyes, wow, look how much progression I've experienced. I thought that was incredible. I was like, that makes complete sense. And so he said, you know what, man? He goes, again, call it whatever you want. He goes, I get it. He goes, you have a mental block because he's like, you called it a diary, and he's like, that has some type of, feminine connotation. He goes, call it a journal. He's like, does that sound better to you? I said, yeah, I guess in a way it does. He's like, yeah, right. He goes, the words matter. He's like, so what you say to yourself and what you say inwardly and outwardly, he's like, it makes a difference. He goes, so change your narrative, use different words to justify it however you need to. He goes, but give it a shot. So I did. So on The Bachelor, the entire time I wrote in my journal, and this was the same journal that I wrote within. But what's so interesting here was on this day, I was journaling about, I was upset because people were saying I was a boring bachelor. And so as I'm writing through here, you can see my thought process. I was very defensive at the beginning. I said, they're saying I'm boring. And I said, I kind of believe it myself, but then I started going a little bit lower, and I said, how do I get, how am I boring? I actually I Googled what the definition of boring so I could write it on paper. I said, boring. Boring is, what does it say, not interesting. And then I write right below it, how can I be boring when I played Division I football, played in the NFL, and worked in the OR, seeing surgeries on the daily, and went on The Bachelorette and The Bachelor. So, fragile ego. My ego was in straight defense mode, wasn't willing to hear any perspective other than my own, and I was like, no, they're wrong. So I went down there and I said, maybe the better words are not entertaining. And basically what I did was I turned it back on everyone else. I said, they all just don't. They're just not intelligent. They don't know what the word boring means, right? That was just me. Because again, my ego was not willing to just like hear a perspective other than my own. My ego went straight on the defense. And I started to just basically try to just push back and say, no, you're all wrong, as opposed to me trying to understand. And again, that's very common with people pleasers, is a lot of times a people pleaser will be fearful of being seen as wrong because then we feel that we might be judged and viewed as less intelligent, or just people are going to have a less favorable opinion of us, because I always thought the more times that I was wrong, it would tally up. And I'm like, eventually people would be like, he's always wrong. I don't want to be around this guy. And so I was afraid to be wrong, and I couldn't be wrong. So that was my thought process. But then at the very bottom, what I love here is that at the very bottom, as I'm going through like this whole mental thing and things are spilling out on paper, I wrote this comment about positive self-talk. And I gave myself a couple of positive affirmations at the bottom. Now, I don't know if you all have heard about positive self-talk. Maybe it's your first time, maybe it's your 100th time. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't. But I can promise you that the words matter. And the words that you choose to say internally, they impact the way that you view yourself. They absolutely do. If you call yourself a failure, that is ultimately what you will become. You will become what you say you are. And I, at first, was like, no, they're just words. It's the actions that matter. But again, we typically will act upon the way that we feel and what we think internally, if we're even cognizant of what it is that we're thinking. And so I started to see what I was thinking. I'm seeing them with journaling. And so journaling brings that sense of self-awareness. When you're able to look at it and say, okay, this is exactly what's going on in my head. I'm going to take a moment and really focus in on being intentional and getting it out onto paper and then reflecting upon it. And it's so incredibly powerful, because what you'll often find is you'll start to see, maybe, my ego is a little wounded. Maybe I need to start, taking a step back instead of being defensive and start to, just open my mind up to the possibility of a new perspective. And that's what I started to do. I realized that life was always about right or wrong for me. Again, the people pleaser thought one person's right, one person's wrong. And so I spent my entire life trying to be right instead of trying to understand. And so that was a big life lesson that I learned, is that trying to understand others and get to know their story and realize that there's something much deeper rooted than just what we see when we first meet them. And when we just try to understand a different perspective, we start to manipulate our own perspective. And I think we realize we're more connected than what we think. Again, I have a lot more in common than I realize with people, but a lot of people see me for what I am physically, and they go, there's nothing that I share in common with them. But when I talk about mental health all the time, I get a lot of people, it doesn't matter what they look like, whether they're male, female, their ethnicity. I have connected with everyone across the board because one thing that we all have in common is our mental health. And many of us with today's culture have feelings of insufficiency due to comparison culture. And many of us are living a life that maybe isn't authentically our own because we're trying to live a life for others for that validation. I certainly was. And so I think that's something that's very, very common. And I found that I can connect with people no matter what we look like, but what's internal is what really matters. Now, to bring that sense of self-awareness and to really continue to go down that self-love journey, again, if you look at me here today and you hear me talking, you go, oh, this guy's 30 years old. He really doesn't there's no way he has it figured out. You're right, I don't have it figured out, okay? Don't take my word for it. You don't have to. If you do, great. If you don't want to, take his word for it. So Jay Shetty has the #1 mental health podcast in the world. This guy, he puts out, I think it's a podcast every single day, and he brings on the thought leaders in mental health, and he just has them basically, they speak. And what's so incredibly powerful about this podcast is, I put up there a perspective shift. But what you find is that the more times you listen to people, you start to realize, especially on his podcast, I started to hear the same words being repeated over and over again. And these words used to not have meaning to me. For example, manifestation. That was a word that I never, the first time I heard it, I was in Missouri, I was in the gym. This girl comes walking in, and I was like blown away. I'm like, this girl is so beautiful. Like, I got to go say something. So I mustered up this courage, and I approached her and introduced myself, and we ended up going out on a date. And when we were out on a date, she said, yeah, I just, so she came from Los Angeles, is where she was from. She was visiting family. And she goes, yeah, I just, with me, I just stay positive because I really just, I manifest what I want. And I was like, what, you do what? She goes, I manifest, what I want. I was like, what does that mean? She's like, manifestation. I was like, yeah, what is that? And she was like, it's when you basically you think about what you want, and then you start to take the steps necessary to achieve what it is you're looking to do. She's like, you basically think your way into that reality. She said that, and I smiled. I go, oh, that's really cool. And in my head, I was like, man, that's some LA type stuff right there. like, she's beautiful, but I'm going to have to just I'm going to let that one slide, I do not understand that. I've lived in Missouri 28 years. I've never even heard that word. We're going to just move on because I don't know where to take that. I remember thinking that moment, I was just like, yeah, all right, she's a little out there, but sure, manifestation. And what do you know? 7-8 years later, that word comes up again in this podcast over and over and over by the same people or different people, but they're all using the same words. And so I thought, well, if they're all saying these words, they must have some type of importance, right? They must mean something. Why would they all keep saying it? And that's when I realized that these words will hold weight when I choose for them to hold weight. So I can look at them and go, yeah, manifestation. Woo, that's some woo-woo. That's okay, all right. Or I could hear it and go, all right, yeah, manifestation. I'm going to give that a shot. I'm going to start figuring out what exactly that means and how to implement it, okay? I'm going to start finding a way to make it, become a reality. What I was doing was placing weight upon those words. Again, the power of words. They're not powerful if you choose to believe they're not, but if you choose to assign value to those words, they all of a sudden will have a different meaning. And that's what's so great about this podcast. I'm just a sponge. All I do, I sponge up everything I hear, and I regurgitate it back out to you all. None of these thoughts that I have today are my own, really. They're a culmination of other individuals' perspectives. And I'm just now the sounding board that's just pushing it back out from what I learned because it really helped me out. Now, these are some of my favorite realizations that have helped me out in the last year, and I think there's a few of them that might help you guys, maybe one or two. But when I say the words matter, again, when it comes to finding self-love, the words that we use internally, they make all the world's difference as far as how we externalize the way that we feel and how we think of ourselves as humans. So these are some of the realizations that I had as I went on this self-help journey, this self-healing journey. I had these either said to me one time or another, or I heard them in a podcast, and I want to share a few with you. So I want to talk about that very first one. I think this is something to always, be cognizant of. If you wouldn't say it publicly for people to hear, don't say it to yourself internally. So when you have those negative self-thoughts in your head, just say, stop yourself and go, is this something that I would say out loud, for people in a room to hear? If the answer is no, then don't say it. Don't say it, and start to hold yourself accountable and really start to say, okay, I'm not going to use this language because, guys, the more times that you use it, the more likely it is to become a reality. I think about it from the sense of like failing in life. So failing is something that I used to when I grew up. I thought if you fail, you lose. But now the way I see failure, and this is just a regurgitation from what I heard from somebody else, but they said failures are nothing more than lessons learned. So the more times you fail, the closer you get to the truth, the closer you get to finding success. And that's the beauty of failure, is you get closer to finding success. The danger in failure is when you believe yourself to become one. When you believe yourself to be a failure, that's when it's destructive, and then you will basically think your way into being a failure. And every time something goes wrong, you'll say, yep, that's just what I thought would happen, because I am a failure, because this is what always happens in my life. So I've realized that now I tell myself, if I start having a negative self-thought, I stop myself. I'm like, would you say this out loud? No? Stop then. And I'll tell myself, stop. I'll say that in my head. Sometimes I'll say it audibly. I'll talk to myself in person, you know. People say you're crazy, and I'm like, I might be crazy at this point, but you know what? But it works. Another realization that really helped me out was, especially with comparison culture, which is so rampant in today's society, is beat yesterday every day. That's a motive, a saying that I use every single day when I wake up. The beauty in that saying is that beat yesterday every day deals with just beating yourself, being a little bit better than you were the day before. Not comparing yourself to anybody else, just being a little bit better. And for me, what I said is, okay, every day I wake up, I'm going to just become better in one aspect of my life. That's it. Whatever it looks like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to try to learn one new thing a day. And after 365 days, a whole year, that's 365 new things, right? That's progress. Like, that's growth. And some days I learn 10 things, and sometimes maybe I'm too busy and I don't learn anything, but likely you learn something every single day, you just may not realize it. But that's, I think, incredibly powerful, because when you shift that narrative in this comparison culture and you go, I'm going to focus on just beating yesterday's version of myself. It's very, very possible, very realistic, right? If we're competing against ourselves, we can always be a little bit better than we were the day before. So that's incredibly powerful to me. For the people pleasers in the room, again, me being one of them, this was one I heard recently in a Jay Shetty podcast. It was actually said by Tom Holland, the Spider-Man actor, and he was regurgitating it from somebody else, so I don't know who the original person that said it was. But he said when it comes to seeking validation from others and being concerned about what others think, this is what a saying I like to tell myself, just to remind myself of, like, does this person's opinion actually hold weight, or are they just saying something that really, like, they don't know exactly like who I am, so it doesn't matter. And the saying was, if you have a problem with me, call me, and if you don't have my phone number, you don't know me well enough to have a problem with me. Pretty powerful, right? Because when we remind ourselves of all this negativity that gets launched out at us, whether it's online, whether it's in the workspace, whether it's someone you walk by on the street and you can just see them casting judgment upon you with their looks alone, like just with them taking a side eye at you. I remind myself every time that somebody sends negativity my way, and I just go, do they have my phone number? Nope. All right, doesn't matter then, right? And that's a way to protect myself, because again, it's like, if you don't know who I am, how can you judge me? You're just judging what you think I am or what I remind you of, but you don't know me enough to be able to actually judge me. Now, if you have my phone number, if you do know, my favorite hobbies, and if you're a friend or family member of mine, absolutely. Then guess what? When someone says something to me, I'm going to hold myself accountable and say, okay, talk to me. But we'll have a good, honest discussion. But when it comes to just outsiders projecting out that anger, when you believe that saying, then you can just kind of brush it off, and you can go, okay, you don't know me, so that's fine. Like, I can empathize with you because there's clearly some type of internal pain that you're expressing outwardly, and so I empathize with you, as opposed to me feeling offended. I'm going to wish you well and go on with my day. I hope you heal, and I hope you become better. And then, the rest of these, again, I don't need to jump into all of them, but to kind of end things with me, as far as tie it all up in a pretty bow. My entire life, I was chasing external validation. And what I found with external validation is it's temporary. It goes away, all right? There's an expiration date on it. What I needed to fill that void with was internal validation. And that was a choice, but that's something that I have to choose every single day. I have to choose every single day that I wake up to say I am enough, that I am proud of what I've accomplished, and that I have a loving, supportive community of people around me, journaling, reflecting upon what I currently have in my life, and say, you know what, Clayton, you are enough, right? And so that's what I found, is it's that internal validation that will stick with you and fill that void, because the external validation will always come and go, and you'll always chase the next big thing. I don't know if this will play, but what can finding yourself look like? Well, let me see if this will even play. It might just skip over. Okay, so this is my before Dougie, and that's my after Dougie. So I've taken up dance, and this is something, I'll let it play out here. I thought I was real cool at the end right there. Thank you. Thank you. So what can finding yourself look like? What I've realized, guys, is for me, in order to find that true self-love, I had to be me for me, nobody else. And so as I realized that a lot of the things that I did, whether it was medical sales, whether it was football, whether it was being the bachelor, I was doing that all to appease other people. And then I realized, you know what, how about if I go about life and just try to be myself? What would that look like? What are some things in my life that I've always wanted to do, but I didn't do it for fear of judgment from others? One of them was dancing. I remember that I always wanted to learn to dance. I remember when I was a kid, my parents bought this movie. It was called You Got Served. And me and my brothers would dance in the basement, on the final dance scene. And I always wanted to learn to dance, but the few times that I tried to dance in public, I had people kind of side-eye me. And it just I remember those moments. They seared in my brain, and I was like, I'm not dancing. They're judging me. And so I stopped. But now that I have this self-love and validation through just going on the self-awareness journey, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this for me. And so the first part of the video was when I tried that Dougie the very first time. And then about 2 months later, I went back to it and I had gotten a little bit better. And that's an anchor point of a before and after to show progress. But really what I found was now I'm posting this on my social media, and now I get to finally be who I actually want to be, right? And so what else besides dancing have I done? Well, I changed my hairstyle. So I used to have my hairstyle high and tight because I was told that you don't want to stand out in the operating room. You want to fit in. You don't want the surgeons to notice you. If they don't notice you, it's a good day in the OR. That means because you didn't exist and therefore you weren't a problem. And so the way that I presented myself, I changed, I allowed myself to look a certain way for other people. Well, now that I'm, loving who I am and I'm just doing the things I want to do, I changed my hairstyle. This is a perm. Hate to say it, but it is. So I got no, embarrassment saying that. So people are like, you really went, yes, I got a perm, and apparently it's coming back in style. So I'm seeing more and more people with it. I got my earrings, I got earrings, and that's something I did as well. Why did I not get them at the first point? I always thought they looked cool. But again, where I grew up, if you got earrings, people thought, something of your sexuality. And so I was so afraid of oh, what if someone thinks I'm this? And now, I'm like, I just want to express myself in whatever way possible. The only thing that matters is what it means to me. So I've been changing my appearance, and doing whatever I want to do. And that's what I've been able to just have this infinite amount of energy now. Because again, the way that you express yourself, it really does attract a certain type of person. Are you attracting the audience that and the people that you want to attract in your life? These are two pictures side by side. These are both Ford Mustangs. So the same make and model, but a different year, right, of a car. Some people like the one on the left more. Some people like the one on the right more. But what I can tell you is more than likely is that these cars will attract a different type of buyer. Certain people, I personally like the one on the right. I know people that would rather have the one on the left all day. Why am I showing this? Because people, based off of even how we look, how we present ourselves, we attract a certain type of energy, a certain type of person. So when you, I see a hand raised.
Well, all I was going to say is it only matters what's on the inside.
It does, exactly. Exactly, it really does. But for me, what I found was because I didn't have any value in myself internally, I started to try to externalize and build up something that was impressive to other people. And the fact of the matter is that as I was trying to build up this external image, I was attracting a certain type of person that liked the way that I looked. But I didn't want to look that way. I didn't want to be that person, right? And so I was attracting people that I didn't even want to be around. Well, as I've been able to just now express myself outwardly, and now people can see who I actually am, it's attracting a different type of crowd. It's the crowd that I actually want to be a part of. It's those individuals. I'm like, this is the people that I've always wanted to be surrounded by, right? And again, people, we form judgments on people based off of their appearance. We just do. And not to say it's right or wrong. Sometimes we just make a quick judgment call, but we naturally relate to people that that look like us, that talk like us, that wear similar clothes to us. And so if you find yourself being like, well, I don't even like the group of people I'm around, you have to ask yourself, well, are you authentically being yourself? Are you being a different version of you that is causing you to look a little bit different and act different? And what I found is when you just allow yourself to be, you will attract the energy that you actually want to attract. So that's just why I use the car analogy. Absolutely, it's more all about what's on the inside, but a lot of times how we feel on the inside is what we project out externally, and we change the way that we act and the way that we're viewed by others. So to wrap it up, I found that at the end of the day, for me, when it came to who I am, I'm not a football player. I'm not the Bachelor. I'm not, a medical sales rep. All of those things were things that I did, but they're not who I am. For me, what I found was, again, the words matter, and for me to label myself, I had to find a label that would follow me and fit who I was from my very first breath to my very last breath. And what I found was, I was looking for this really long, drawn out, really complex label. But then I went back to this. I am me. I am me. I'm nothing more, I'm nothing less. I am what I am today. I can tell you all the things that I do in my life, but ultimately, I am just me. And that's the beautiful thing, because I will always be me, from my very first breath to my last, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And when I carry that label, I can just confidently go about life and say, okay, all I have to do every day when I wake up is just be me. That's it. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself, Clayton. Whatever you feel, go do it, and watch what it brings. And what it's brought me is so much love from others, self-love for myself, and I'm now able to go around and do this and speak openly, and I'm so incredibly grateful that I was able to today, and thank you all so much for your time.